The Edmonton Oilers season can be described in two halves, the first 22 games and the subsequent 28. What is driving the Oilers turnaround on today's edition of Locked On Oilers?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is going to be a dive into the numbers, something I frankly like to do every couple games. And the Oilers season really has been night and day. You think about where they were mid-November, how ugly that first month of the season was, how bad the penalty kill and the power play were. And the season has undoubtedly turned since November 23rd. Since that come from behind win against the Rangers, where the Oilers really poured it on, the Oilers season has taken a really big leap in a lot of different areas. So on today's show, we're going to hit the different components of this turnaround. The opening segment is going to be oriented around just the allocation of minutes, ice time, responsibilities. Our second segment going to tackle the numerical changes, the statistical changes, and then in our final segment, we'll talk about what it all means, how sustainable some of these improvements are, and tie a bow on this idea. So, starting in the abstract, we can all agree a hockey game is 60 minutes. Occasionally, we'll play overtime in the regular season of the playoffs, but most nights, we're going to end our game after 60 minutes. Of those 60 minutes, roughly 75 to 80% of those minutes are going to be at even strength at 5-on-5. Occasionally, you'll have a game with more penalties where it'll be a little bit lower. But for the most part, we're going to say 75% of those 60 minutes are going to be at 5-on-5. And now, if you're curious of how to work out this math, you're going to pull out your calculator and you're going to do 60 times 0.75, and that's going to give you 45. 45 minutes of even strength hockey, 15 minutes of special teams hockey. We understand and we know that the Oilers' unique advantage in having two superstar players in McDavid and Draisaitl is that when you separate them, you can have them out there for almost half of the game separate from each other. So if we're going to include the power play time where they play together, that's about 3.5 to 4 minutes per game. So if you want to subtract that 3.5, 4 minutes from Leon and Connor's ice time, which is around 21-ish minutes each, and you want to say they play 34 of the minutes even strength of the 45 minutes of overall even strength, and you're playing those two guys separate from each other, then you only got to find another 11 minutes of even strength hockey to allocate throughout your lineup. And of course, that's not always the case. We know that Chris Knoblauch does like to roll Connor and Leon together in certain situations. We know over the last few weeks, the Oilers have liked to throw them out there together after they've killed the Oilers have successfully killed off a penalty, because neither Connor nor Leon kills off penalties. And the other advantage to that is you're going to assume that because the other team was on the power play, their best players were on the ice, that they're not going to be out there right after a power play has failed. So you're giving yourself not only a talent advantage on your end that you're going to load up Connor and Leon together, usually with Hyman, Ekholm, and Bouchard, you're also going to get to do that against the other team's lower in the lineup players, and you're going to create a skill gap advantage, which allows you to really tilt the ice and set momentum and, build off of that. And even if Connor, Leon, Bouch, Ekholm, and Hyman don't end up scoring, if they can get the puck down to the offensive zone, make the other team play defense for a little bit, just to wear them out, put some heat on the goalie, that is helpful when you're talking about swinging the tide of a game. Hockey is undoubtedly the most fluid sport. You can make an argument potentially for soccer, but being that hockey has more overall possessions throughout the course of the game, because possession changes more frequently than it does in soccer, and soccer's usually at a little bit slower of a pace, it's hard to compare one-to-one. But hockey is so fluid and so dynamic that some elements of this conversation are tricky to weed out. This isn't like football where if the offensive team sends out 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a running back, you're going to send out 5 defensive backs. You're going to send out 2 safeties, 2 outside corners, and a slot corner to match up with that. You don't have that advantage in hockey because you're not always going to be able to keep your favorable or preferred matchups in the game. You're not always going to be able to get Connor out there against another team's 3rd or 4th line. Some of the times you're going to want to get Connor out there against the other team's best players in the hopes that you can swing the game that way, that you can seize control by canceling out the other team's best players. And if Connor can win and Leon can win their minutes against the other team's best players, that makes the burden of responsibility on your depth players lighter. They don't have to do as much. And there are levels to how you want to talk about a bottom 6 and responsibilities. For a team like the Oilers, you need something from your bottom 6. It's not that the Oilers can't afford to have games where sometimes it's just their big guns doing the heavy lifting. It's that the differentiation point between an okay team, a good team, and a great team is often their depth. It's how much can our coach trust to all 4 of our lines, all 3 of our defensive pairs, and on occasion our backup goalie to go out there and not just tread water, but to actively influence the game, to put effort towards controlling the flow of the game. That's really one of the benchmarks of a strong team and something the Oilers have done in reasonable stretches this year. The forward group still has some ironing out to do, is the way I would phrase it. Jeff Skinner, I feel like, is definitely one of their 12 best forwards, but being that they like Podkolzin with Leon, being that they like having Nuge on the first line because Nuge has been there so long and he's got familiarity playing with Connor and with Hyman, they kind of leave Jeff as an afterthought. And I think he's more useful at 5-on-5 than Janmark is. I know Janmark's penalty killing makes him a staple. He has to be in the lineup. Him and Connor Brown do a really nice job on the penalty kill. Against Seattle on Monday, the 2 of them were outstanding. I thought that was really instrumental in the Oilers swinging that game, was how effective their penalty kill was at key junctures. And the penalty kill is funky for the Oilers because their best players don't kill penalties. You go and look at some of the more marquee teams around the NHL. Those teams, not all of them, Kucherov's not killing penalties for Tampa Bay. Pasta's not killing penalties for Boston. But a lot of the best players, you think about Mikko Rantanen, he's going to be out there killing penalties because he's great at defense. You think about some of the matchup opportunities that presents. But as far as the straight up math, when you have the opportunity to get real material advantages over the course of a game, in a game where you don't have the right to match substitutions like you do in the other sports, it's really tricky to try and get your preferred matchups and your ideal environmental factors together because, frankly, hockey is so lively. This isn't like the other sports where there are frequent lulls and dead spots where you can play hard match. Sometimes you can, that we have face-offs in hockey. The play does go dead when a goalie freezes the puck, a goal scored, puck goes out of play, offsides, penalty, etc. But for the most part, especially if you're the road team and you don't have the benefit of last change, you're going to send your guys out there in a steady rotation. You're going to try and adapt to the game best you can, but the Oilers shifting gears and really starting to get their footing, I think really starts with their special teams. And we're going to talk about that coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. So be sure to stick around. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, the Eagles, the Chiefs rematch. Endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, icing on the cake. Download the app or head to thefanduel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's fanduel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, breaking down the Oilers season turnaround. And again, this has been a recurring theme. I've talked about this quite a bit on the show over the course of the season, but having adversity is a good thing, especially in the regular season, especially early on in the regular season. Now, of course, you don't want to get into the habit of always coming out of the gate slow. I know there was quite a bit of jovial energy around the Christmas break when the Oilers more or less were like, we kind of did this last year. We kind of know what it takes to turn things around. And I can say objectively, I probably was a little bit too nervous after that first month when they were sitting at 5-5-1 after their first 11 games, and the penalty kill and the power play were both awful. And it took a little while for the Oilers to really kind of find themselves, as weird as that sounds, about a collection of people. But finding what your team needs over the course of a season is really one of the defining characteristics of ultimately whether or not you can reach that high level. And part of that is getting better and finding ways to improve as the season goes along. And some of it is luck. And I know there's always going to be conjecture about momentum, luck, non-tangible factors that we as observers feel but can't statistically point out. There are some examples. You think about things like the penalty kills against the Kraken the other night, and at the key junctures they came in, how the Oilers were able to respond. They were able to get their big guns out there, like we talked about in the first segment, because the Oilers like to get Connor, Leon, Hyman, Ek, and Bush out there when right after a kill. If possible, sometimes it's with Nurse and Kulak. It depends which penalty kill defensive pair was just out there in the 4-on-5 situation. But when you can tilt the ice like that and really seize some control, and you can really take the wind out of the sails of an opponent, when you can kill off their power plays with relative frequency and really make them work harder. But the turnaround for me this season almost entirely starts with the special teams. The leap in performance when you compare the first 22 games to the subsequent 28 games, and we're using that game against the Rangers on November 23rd as the inflection point. When you go and look at that game, where they were stats wise, this is going to sound crazy to hear, but after those first 22 games, the Oilers were converting on an ungodly 15.8% of power plays. They were 9 for 57 through the first 22 games. In all situations, they were shooting 8%. At 5-on-5, they were only shooting 7%. Their team save percentage in all situations was 8.789. Their save percentage in 5-on-5 situations was 9.025. The Oilers were getting absolutely juiced on special teams, and it was tanking their season. If you'll recall, the Oilers had a really hard time putting the puck in the net early on. And we know fundamentally that the Oilers, and look, I know I've made a lot about their ability to come from behind and win games this year because it is an impressive trait. They do have one of the better records in the NHL when the other team scores first. But the Oilers are at their best when they have a lead and they get to pick you apart. You see it from time to time. This isn't the best example to use as far as what makes the Oilers tick, because they haven't done it as of late, because they haven't played great. You know, you could say the Canucks game last week, they won 6-2 is an example of that, where they got out to a lead. The Canucks came back to some degree and made it a little bit dicey, but because that other team is desperate, because they need to do more to create offense, they're going to have to start conceding defensively. And that's where the transition play comes in. That's where transition really starts to become a factor. And it's what makes the Oilers so dangerous. When they have their lines going, and you have Connor, and you have Janmark, and you have Connor Brown, and you have the speed, off the wings, off the rush, to really establish possession, to control the puck, to gain the zone with speed, it's imperative. But circling back around, the special teams are undoubtedly the driving force here, because we're talking about significant increases. We're talking about almost doubling the success rate of power play goals. 31.8% in comparison to 15.8. If you double 15.8, and I'm going to do my mental math here, 15 and 15 is 30. 0.8 and 0.8 is 1.6. 31.6. They are currently at 31.82. this over the last 28 games. They have doubled their successful conversion rate of power plays. And then as far as the penalty kill, 12% better. 12% does not sound like a lot when you're talking about math. It doesn't. 12% of power play success against is probably about one goal every third game, every other game. But again, you got to remember the Oilers were really struggling offensively through those first few games of the season, and they're up they're up more than half a goal per game at 5-on-5. They've improved defensively a third of a goal per game at 5-on-5. The expected goals is about the same. The high danger chances, they're creating a smidge more and conceding a smidge less. But like in the abstract, what makes the Oilers go, their recipe, it's around their big guys dominating the power play. Because if you're scoring 33% of the time and you're getting 3 power plays per game, you're going to score 1 goal a game off the power play. And look, I don't think the Oilers are going to be able to stay over 30% the entire backstretch of the season. And we'll see how well they do over the course of the second half to see how much they can maintain. I'm pulling it up right now. I'm curious where they are in the overall season rankings so far. I mean, they're not that high up. They're sitting, this is penalty kill, not power play. I clicked on the wrong tab. Bad job by me. Now, here we go. Okay, so for the season this year, that's last year. I hate when this website does that. So this year, the Oilers are at 24.39 success rate on the power play. 3, 4, 5, 6. They're in 7th in the NHL overall. Last year in the regular season, the Oilers were at 26.34, which was good for 4th. In the postseason last year, they were at 29.33, the second best of any team in the postseason. But you got to remember, over the course of a 40-some-odd game sample size, and the Oilers have about 30-some-odd games remaining, and we'll see just how well they can maintain the special teams juice. I know I've talked about it on the show. I know Sportsnet has talked about it at times as well. Everyone kind of feels like even though Leon's leading the league in goals right now, he probably has a little bit more to give on the power play because so much of his offense has been at even strength. And look, that's not a bad thing, but when you have the opportunity to even make your power play more dangerous, you think about him missing the net on that one power play against the Kraken on, I think what was that, Monday? Yeah, Monday night. That wasn't puck that should have gone in. And you think about him, you think about the Hyman, and on the power play in particular, both of those guys probably have a smidge more to give. You'd say Connor probably does as well, but if you want to talk about just purely offense and making all of the math square away, the Oilers need that advantage on special teams because their depth at 5-on-5 is not going to create a ton of offense on its own. Janmark, Connor Brown, Henrique, the lower you get in the lineup, the less offense you can consistently expect. I know that's obvious, but some people get weird about this idea, and they always say, well, you couldn't play a team with 12 Connor McDavids. It wouldn't work. Of course you could. You could play 12 Connor McDavids. You could play a team of 12 Connor McDavids and 6-7 Bouchards, and they'd be pretty good. They might have some issues as far as the physical aspects of the game, but I think more often than not, fourth-line Connor McDavid would be every bit as effective as first-line Connor McDavid if you were to successfully clone him 12 times. But the Oilers are predicated on a top-down methodology. They need that top part of their lineup, which includes Ekholm and Bouchard. And look, I'll be fair. Nurse and Kulak have been significantly better this 28-game block as well. I should go and do. And we're going to do it during the Four Nations face-off break. We're going to do, you can't really call it a half-season report card because it'll be a little bit more than the 41-game mark. But we'll do report cards. We'll talk about the before and after realistic expectations later on. But when you have the top half of the lineup humming and the bottom half only really has to do cherry on top, whipped cream on top, and they don't have to do the meat and potatoes, things are going to work out really well for the Oilers based on the way they're constructed. We're going to take one more break on today's show. When we come back, we'll tie a bow on this, set some expectations for the second half of the season right after this. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. I haven't been to an NFL playoff game in a hot minute because my football team, the Giants, haven't been very good in a long time. But going back when I was a kid, one of the great experiences of my life, you get tailgating, the energy, everybody's got their chests puffed out. And Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for events, even playoff games, even easier. It filters out the fluff to only show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. If you wanted to go to the Super Bowl in New Orleans this year, if you're rooting for the Birds, if you're rooting for the three-peat, either way, Gametime has the super deal, which makes the best value for the event available for you. The app's features things like the seat view before you buy and all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout make the experience smooth and reliable. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee always gives you peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. The Oilers aren't back in action until tomorrow against the Red Wings. Of course, we'll have an episode for you as soon as that game goes final. And I want to address it. There was a technical issue. The post-game episode after the Canucks that I recorded last Thursday after they won the game 6-2 didn't post on YouTube, and I regret not checking to make sure it had posted properly. So hand up, that's on me. Sorry about that. That's why there were 2 episodes yesterday and why one of them was from last Thursday. But nevertheless, just wanted to address that real quick before. Accountability is important when you do content. You got to build trust with your audience. You got to be credible. It's important. And to tie a bow on this, I love looking at the data and trying to diagnose or figure out what's going on in whatever case we're talking about. When you want to talk about, well, a team started out mediocre, 5-5-1 after 11 games. After the first 22, the Oilers were 11-9-2. They weren't really playing great. 64 goals across 22 games, less than 3 goals per game, conceding a little bit more than 3 goals per game, only generating. It's impossible to me to conceive how a power play with Connor, Leon, Hyman, Bush, and Nuge was only converting at 15.8%. You go and look at the season-long power plays this year. There are a few teams worse than 15%. The Kings are at 15.93. Anaheim is at 13.4. The Bruins are at 13.3, and the Islanders are at an ungodly 11.8%. But the Oilers' turnaround coinciding with getting their special teams going, it's absolutely imperative. And in today's environment, in today's NHL, where you need to score, and look, I value defense, I value goaltending. I have lived a lot of my life with the benefit of having either Henrik Lundqvist or Igor Shesterkin in my net. It has made a world of difference in my peace of mind to know I'm not worried about my goalie. But today's league is predicated on offense. And I know we did an episode last week talking about how difficult it is to create offense, that the environment's a little bit different, that teams are creating fewer shots on goal, fewer expected goals. And overall, it's a little bit harder to get the puck to quality areas, even though teams are shooting at a higher percentage, a higher success rate, which means the shooting talent's getting better. The goaltending is getting a smidge worse. You could say there's probably a bit of a trade-off there. You can compare it as far as the tactics. It's definitely a little bit harder because defenses and goaltending are getting better. You can talk about it from the perspective of teams are being more selective. They're waiting to get the puck to better areas. They're not settling for as low quality of chances. And one of the great things about sports in general is that we get to find out as it happens in real time. All of the things I was just talking about comparing this season to last season in terms of shooting percentage, save percentage, power play opportunities, all that stuff, that was only based on the first 40-something games of the season. We still have a back half of the season where typically teams, and I should say where referees call fewer penalties because as the season goes along, these games get higher stakes and the referees don't want to decide the game. They leave it up to the guys on the ice to make the plays, to swing however they want it, so they are not perceived as leaning on the game or making and having an influence on the outcome of the game. But I don't think it's realistic to expect the Oilers to continue to convert at over 30% of their power plays the rest of the season. I think they can do it for 5-10 game windows over the final stretch, but I don't think you're going to see this team over 30%. Teams just don't do that. If you look historically over the last handful of seasons, the highest is usually in the high 20s. Tampa Bay last year was first at 28.63. 2 years ago, Edmonton was first at 32.3. That was an all-time record for this era, what we would consider the dead puck era. The year before that, Toronto at 227. And I should qualify dead puck. When I say dead puck, I'm talking about the window from post 2004-5 lockout to the present, where out of that lockout, the NHL was a lot tighter. It was lower scoring, fewer penalties called, lots of clutching, lots of grabbing, slower overall players. It was a harder offensive environment. You look at the point totals for the league leaders and a lot of the key statistics, and it's fundamentally different. There was that year Jamie Benn had 87 points, and that led the entire NHL in 2015, which is crazy when you think about where we are now, where Connor is almost a guaranteed 110 to 130, depending on how good he is that given year. Ditto McKinnon. Austin Matthews has been over 100 points a couple times. And in today's environment, you need that special teams edge. It's not just good enough to be a good 5-on-5 team. You really need to have both areas of the game down, because in today's world, and a lot of this conversation is frankly centered around the postseason, because that's the expectation, is how do the Oilers compare to the teams they're going to run into, whether it's Colorado, Dallas, Winnipeg, Vegas. You could throw Vancouver in there if you want, Minnesota. There is a lot of quality in the Western Conference in a way that there isn't in the East, but you're going to need almost everything going for you to beat these teams. And so you would say, well, sometimes you need to get lucky. Yes, you do. Fundamentally, to win 16 games over the course of 2.5 months, which the NHL playoffs are, it's going to take some bounces. And not every one of those bounces is going to be directly influenced as a conscious action. There are going to be imperfections on the ice. Pucks are going to skip. Pucks are going to roll. They're going to end on edge. And it's going to be difficult to make a play. But part of that is being in a position to make a play. I'll leave you with the quote every Little League coach said to me growing up. Luck is what happens when opportunity and preparation converge. If you're in the right spot, the puck's going to find you. I'll leave you with the Rick Nash quote. The puck finds good players find the puck. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I will talk to you guys tomorrow after the game against the Red Wings. I will see you guys then.